Good afternoon. Um, I was on a trip over the summer with my family. We traveled down the West Coast from the Portland area to LA. These are my kiddos, pretty cute kids, I think, objectively speaking. And I started thinking about this thing called summer break. And why do we have the opportunity for them to step away from school for several months and take such a trip? And does anyone know why summer break was instituted in schools? Yes, because at one point it was important for the kids to help harvest the fields. I don't know about you, but my kids would not know what to do with one of these. I would not know what to do with one of these, but I'm certainly thankful that there are people who do know what to do with these because it's an important job. But this kind of set off a train of thinking about things that exist today that are steeped in tradition, steeped in reasons that at one point made sense, but we don't check them. And so think about the design of a traditional classroom: desks and tables organized into rows. Does anyone know why this design came about? Yes, inspired by the industrial model of education, because the assembly line represented efficiency. It represented a one way flow of information, much like the education model at that time, the teacher communicating to the student. But education doesn't happen that way anymore. Education is very social, it's participative, it's collaborative. And so I want to fast forward to employee surveys. The first recorded employee surveys in organizations date back to the early 1910s. They were called employee attitude surveys. And they've certainly evolved with respect to their scope. We look at, communication, we look at culture, we look at leadership. This gave rise to the annual employee engagement survey, popularized in the 80s and the 90s. And then, of course, we took those paper surveys and we moved them online in the digital era. But the reality is, relative to the pace of work and how much it's changed and transformed, the employee survey hasn't really evolved all that much. So, if you think about most listening programs, the way we organize results, the way we report on results are consistent with the org chart. They assume that people work within these nice, tidy boxes, whether it's the org hierarchy or its standard dimensions as they exist within the HRIS. But do you actually accomplish work consistent with your org hierarchy? No, in most cases, work is very matrixed. It's cross-functional. If you're bringing a new product to market, you might be on a team with somebody from sales and marketing and engineering and product and finance. All of those people roll up to different parts of the organization. They report into different people. And so reporting on results in this way, it's very difficult for managers based on how they get their data to take action, to actually move the needle, because they don't have direct influence over all of these cross-functional horizontals. There's also the AI collaboration, right? This is fundamentally changing how people experience work and how they accomplish work and how they collaborate. But this is largely absent in traditional employee surveys. So I'm going to make the case today that it is time to reimagine and reinvent employee listening as we know it. And I want to talk about something that I think is the next frontier in employee listening, called network-based listening. Network-based listening is the intersection of employee listening with organizational network analysis. And just to be clear, I think surveys have tremendous value in organizations. Some of the most important data I've worked with leading people analytics teams have come from surveys. And so what I'm going to talk about here in the context of O&A is survey-based O&A. You can do all of what I'm going to discuss in the context of a survey. Case in point, the utility of a stay intentions item. So I see myself still working here in 2 years' time. There's probably no better predictor of actual exits than looking at responses to this item. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We don't need a very sophisticated ML model with a bunch of complex engineered features to understand who is most likely to leave. And by who, of course, I'm talking about aggregate pockets. And so I really wanted, we did some great work on this item at Chime, and I really wanted to share a metric that illustrates the departure in survival trends from respondents who rated this favorably relative to respondents who rated it unfavorably. Unfortunately, PR says I can't do that. So just know that it's a large delta and it is significant. And so when people respond unfavorably to this, they leave at much higher rates relative to people who respond favorably. But surveys should be augmented, right? It should reflect the nature of influence within today's organizations. And so we can include questions like this. Who is most important for you to have greater access to? And we can construct archetypes of influence. So, for example, advisors, or who plays an active role in your professional development journey? Mentors. Who can you count on most to support you in your role? Support anchors. And based on the responses to these items, we can weight the relative influence and priority that people put on these key people. And so let's kind of play this through with something that I think will resonate with all of you. I think organizations today are really strapped with needing to do more with fewer resources. And so let's take a look at an overload and burnout case study here. So what I'm showing on the screen is a bubble chart, and each of these bubbles represents a community. I'm not going to go deep into like graph theory here, but the Louvain algorithm was used for community detection. So communities are effectively just pockets of collaboration, irrespective, independent of the org chart and how people are formally structured. This is how they're actually operating. This is how they actually accomplish their work objectives. And so we can overlay survey responses to understand how experiences vary across these informal networks of collaboration. So in this case, the item is detachment. I am able to detach from work during my non-working hours. And so highlighted in red is a community of collaborators who are experiencing an unfavorable experience related to detachment. So the y-axis represents the average score for that community. And so once we detect these, how do we actually influence it? I think this is a really problematic situation for traditional listening, because how do leaders influence these informal networks? Again, informal networks are comprised of members who roll up to different parts of the organization. And so one way that we can think about this is looking at within that community I just showed, who are the key influencers? Who are the most connected people to others within the community? In other words, if we can get them on board with whatever change we're trying to champion, change is going to be more efficient, it's going to be more effective, and we have a higher probability of success than working through the traditional org chart. And so on the x-axis here, we have a relative influence score that's been normalized to a 100-point scale from no influence to most influence on the right. And the three bubbles that are highlighted here are three influencers whose names have been anonymized. And these are the people who are most connected within that community. But in addition to this within community influencer view, and by the way, we use the PageRank algorithm for this, so much in the same way that Google search results look, we can start to look at cross-community connectors. And so the betweenness algorithm, betweenness centrality algorithm is really important for this. And so in addition to understanding who is influential within each of these communities, we can look across communities. Who are those people who are bridging divides? They are the glue that maybe holds together finance and HR. They are the reason that these pockets of collaboration interact with one another. And so you think about it from a change management perspective. If you want to drive change at scale, whether on the heels of a listening cycle or otherwise, we really need these key influencers in our corner, because that is the most efficient path to impacting a lot of people. So what does this mean for managers? I think the role of managers is incredibly important. I also think that management has fundamentally changed. The way we show up for our people, the way we coach people, the way we develop people has fundamentally changed, because we are working in a highly matrixed organization. And so, as it turns out, Answers to those questions, who do you rely on to get work done? Who's most important for you to have greater access to? Who provides you career coaching and guidance? Those are a powerful proxy of manager effectiveness. So, what I mean by that is people who do not list their manager on at least one of those, in aggregate, respond much more favorable across a number of experience dimensions relative to people who list their manager on at least one of those questions. So, for example, a 14-point difference, 14 points lower on manager feedback for people who do not list their manager on at least one of those, who say that their manager is not important to their success across any of those dimensions that we ask. 10 points lower on manager effectiveness. I'm satisfied with my manager's overall performance as a manager. And this next one's really important because if you have ever run an exit survey, you probably know that the number one reason people leave organizations voluntarily is for career growth. They're looking for outside opportunities that they don't think exist within the organization. And so, among people who don't list their manager across any of those items, they score an aggregate 10 points lower on career growth. Now, this is important because we can look at attrition rates, but attrition rates are lagging indicators. The only people reflected in those rates are people who are already gone, and we can't influence their experience. We can't save them. But people who respond on surveys like these are people who are active within the organization, people whose experiences we can influence for the better, and we can proactively do something about what the next most likely outcome will be, in this case, exits due to career growth opportunities. I believe that employee listening is one of the most important programs for any organization. As I mentioned, it's been my experience that employee listening generates some of the most important data for organizations. But how we drive change is so important. As Stephanie was mentioning, we have to take action. Listening and not doing is even worse than not asking. So, how do we do that? How do we leverage the power of network-based listening to influence change? Well, the answer is not more things to do. It's not self-reporting progress relative to goals in an action planning module. Managers don't want to do that. It's also not adding to the noise. It's not more emails and Slacks and Teams notifications. God knows we have plenty of those. I believe the answer lies in strategically activating influencers who quietly shape experiences, intentions, and ultimately behaviors. And I think a network-based lens is the missing piece. Thank you.